Bonefish.
What's up, everyone? Listening to Bonefish. It's the podcast about experimental psychedelic music.
Hello.
We have been talking about the music of Animal Collective, but today we're expanding our horizons a bit. We got to chat with writer Sadie Sartini Garner, who is a awesome music writer. She just wrote the review in Pitchfork for the new Andre 3000 album, New Blue Sun, the sort of surprise experimental flute-based album.
Yeah,
we kind of chat a bit about how that record intersects with the kind of LA sort of new age ambient beat scene that Andre made a lot of that record with, people from that scene.
so I guess the reason why we're doing an Andre episode is because, this is a podcast about psychedelic music, experimental music, even though we really focus on one band. But I feel like, at least for me right now, where the interesting stuff is happening in experimental music, in psychedelic music, is kind of in the ambient spiritual jazz space. And I kind of see all that kind of under that one umbrella of psychedelic music. So that's why we kind of wanted to talk about New Blue Sun and the new Andre record and how it's connected to the LA underground scene.
We've name dropped the scene that this record emerged from, several times already on the podcast.
Shout out once again to Leaving Records.
And yeah, having such a massive mainstream artist take a step like this into this field is super exciting, and definitely felt like something that would be within our purview.
And, as two guys who are like in LA and, we're in a bit of a bubble, but like we're going to these shows all the time. This scene is happening right here. So for us, it's like, this is like slapping fucking ass right now. This collab, this Andre Leaving Records collab is.
We're both whittling our own flutes,
Shit, I'm about to buy a flute.
I heard like one of my neighbors like legit playing like some kind of woodwind instrument outside the other day.
Dude, it's happening, man. Heads are gonna.
The New Blue Sun. Yeah, it's infecting.
Yeah, Andre heads are just gonna do like nodding their heads. They're nodding their heads to the new album like it's got beats in it, and they're gonna go buy like some woodwinds.
For sure.
Anyway, so that's why we're talking about that. But okay, cool.
Yeah, Sadie's super awesome writer and has had a lot of insightful things to say. Yeah,
definitely check out Sadie's review. Check out Sadie's work.
Yeah, she's written a bunch for Pitchfork, AV Club, The Ringer, and so definitely stick around for that. But before that, we thought we'd kind of go back and forth about some of our favorite music from this year.
This isn't our top 10 of the year. This is our favorite kind of under the radar, weirdo, experimental, psychedelic, ambient, whatever you want to call it, albums, I think, right? I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. It's the Bonefish recommends. And we should also note, not including Animal Collective. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so my first pick is, no surprise here, Leaving Records. It's called Das Nuvens by Fabiano Di Nascimento. He's a Brazilian guitarist. I think the first time I saw him, I was with you, Christian, at one of the Under the Tree events, and I just immediately loved his music. I'm a sucker for nylon string guitar. He plays a nylon among many different types of guitar, and he does, loops and other things, and he also plays with other artists as well. But this album is kind of his version of a weird 80s lost new age album.
Yeah.
It's really cool. I bought it on record this year, and I've just been playing it all year. Just a cool mix of, Brazilian guitar, weird old synths, some percussion. I love it. Love Fabiano. Always one of the best shows I saw this year was Fabiano with a couple of other musicians, including Sam Goodell. And it was so sick.
Nice. Was
it
he
was a
playing
great
this? Was
show.
he playing stuff from this album? Like, were there like keys and drum
A little
machines and
bit.
stuff? Or
It wasn't
cool.
so it was some songs from the new album, but they had a live drummer
Nice.
who was awesome. I think his first name was Tamir. Anyway, it was very different. It felt just more kind of organic and live, and a bit more kind of more like bossa nova, jazzy, and
Yeah.
it was so good.
I remember that Leaving Records show where we saw him. Was that the first time you'd heard of him?
That was my first exposure to him was live that show, and
Nice.
I immediately devoured all of his music, and I love it.
That's rad. Yeah, I remember that show. Yeah, I listened to this record earlier today, and yeah, super beautiful. It's I kind of my only prior exposure to him being that show, I sort of thought it would be a little different than what it was, but I really loved like the direction and like the kind of feel of it. Yeah, like you said, sort of the new agey kind of like sort of like 80s synths and it's really like pleasant and like but also pretty like emotional. Like the first couple songs on that album especially, maybe like the first three, I feel like I just kept waiting to hear like Tom York like start singing. Like it kind of has that vibe of like,
ooh, interesting. Yeah,
super kind of like moody and like understated, but yeah, super pretty, super nice. Definitely could see what you mean putting that on for like work and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Das Nuvens, I think that means like from the clouds or something.
Okay, cool.
It's definitely cloud related.
Love clouds. We love clouds.
Some of his songs really made me think of like Fortet, which is funny because like he's like, you know, obviously an electronic. I mean, he's like the quintessential folktronic artist.
Fortet without the drums, kind of.
Totally. Yeah. Like,
yeah, I can hear
one
it.
of his songs on this album sounded almost exactly like this one song called Circling by Fortet.
Oh, I love that song. I love that song.
Yeah.
What's your pick?
My first pick for the list is the record Sun Tub by ML Book, who is a Danish composer, singer, songwriter. This record just recently kind of came on my radar. I mean, it only came out at the end of October of this year. I'm not a person who like really seeks out a lot of new music during the year. I usually actually like around this time of year when like lists and stuff come out is when I'll,
you
know,
how do you
spend
do
time
that?
like,
that's crazy.
I don't know. I mean, I'll like if stuff's recommended to me, I'll like look it up. But usually I'm just like, oh, if like artists I know release stuff, I'll check it out. But I don't know. I'm not like the most avarice consumer of, I guess, just like new stuff. But right on. Anyway, well, ML Book, I'm not as familiar with her previous one, but this new album, Sun Tub, was on Gorilla versus Bear's year-end list. It was like their number 2.
That's still around, Gorilla vs. Bear?
Oh yeah, they're still there.
I had no idea. That's so blog rock.
The gorilla and the bear are still going at it, dude.
That's awesome.
But was really kind of struck by how kind of interesting and different this album sounded. It's kind of a mix of like more electronic synthesizer based like explorations with like this deconstructed like alt rock like guitar based kind of like 90s ish like vibe. The first song on the album starts with this pretty like inventive kind of explorative sounding synth and beat, and then when she eventually starts singing, it's sort of a surprise. It's like, oh, I didn't know it was going this direction. But most of the album is these sort of deconstructed guitar and drum based kind of like songwriter songs. But I don't know, it's just kind of, it's got this mix of like nostalgic kind of like vaporwave type things, but also mixed with like, yeah, like grunge guitar and just this kind of pretty evocative mix of sounds. And a lot of the writing about her music talks about kind of triggering this sense of like deja vu. And I feel like I definitely resonated with that. It kind of is like this combination of like, it's very like sort of soothing and like low impact music, but there's this like eeriness to it.
Open, swirling wide, strung up in a red sky, glowing, you slide by.
Yeah, did you get a chance to hear any of this? What did you think of this music?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting contrast of like, yeah, like grungy guitars and some like almost like, I don't know, not quite pedal steel, but like, yeah, synthy stuff or like, yeah.
Yeah, the guitar is
cool.
super forward in the mix, really like glittery and like kind of nostalgic and like. What's your next one?
My next album is by a band whose name is as in at gmail.com. The keystroke at.
It's not like at sign, it's just at.
It's just at.
Okay.
Yeah. It's their first album. The album is called Mind Palace Music. And I don't know if we've talked about this or I sent it to you. It's a duo. It's a guy and a girl. It reminds me of basically like Sung Tong's Animal Collective and like Revolver era Beatles. There's some flute in there, which is really cool. Some good harmonies, some weird keyboards. It's a 30-minute album. Really fucking cool cover. Yeah, check out Mind Palace Music by At. It's pretty cool. I dig it.
You did send me this earlier, and yeah, I really like this record too. The song "Friendship is Frequency," I really dug. Really pretty.
Yeah.
Really kind of bare.
Pretty short songs too.
Inventive and creative. Yeah, definitely second that. I dug that album, especially for Animal Collective fans.
Yeah, you guys are gonna like this shit.
Definitely spiritually akin. Another one of my picks was James Holden, who is a British producer, and he had a new album this year called Imagine This as a High-Dimensional Space of All Possibilities. And it's really sick. He had this album come out 10 years ago called The Inheritors that I really, really dug. And after that got released, Tom York asked him to open for Atoms for Peace on their like US tour.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just really kind of cool, spacey, trancey electronic jams that you can kind of get lost in. Incorporates like a lot of field recordings on this album, and it's kind of like very natural world meets like the synth world.
Yeah, I had heard this before you sent it to me. It's cool, yeah. Very like dense waves of sound.
What you got?
So for my next pick, I think I've talked about this before, but it's I think it's a duo, I'm not sure. Pure Link.
Yeah.
They released 2 albums this year. The first one is a little bit more, it's ambient music, but it's kind of intense, kind of along the lines of like Aphex Twin or some early 2000s ambient music like Gas or and then they released a second album this year called Signs. I like both of them. Signs is probably the more like straight up ambient record. But yeah, their music like kind of harkens back to like the Y2K like ambient house kind of scene and sounds really awesome in headphones.
Yeah, definitely good headphones band.
Dig it. They're pretty new. They're a pretty new group. I think last year was when they first started releasing music.
They sort of, some of their music and kind of vibe reminds me of like Cluster, like the krautrock German band.
Tight, nice
vibe of like a couple dudes in the studio, kind of locked in on a shared wavelength, sort of just going for it. My third pick is a live record by the band Horse Lords, who are a Baltimore-based avant-garde rock band. I've been a fan of them for a handful of years now. They had a studio album come out last year called Comradely Objects, which is really great. but they released like a live sort of EP this year, live in Leipzig, and their studio records are really great, but they're also, just an awesome live band, and it's really great to have a release that catalogs how good they are live. But they basically do kind of like minimal polyrhythmic music that you could easily trace the roots back to kind of the great American minimal composers, like Steve Reich and Philip Glass and Lamont Young and stuff. But they use it with the palette of like kind of like an indie rock band. Like they just have like a drummer, a bassist, a guitarist, and then a fourth dude who plays like saxophone / auxiliary percussion / like electronics. And they kind of do these just sort of evolving jams that are really tight. Also very krautrocky. Another interesting thing about them is they've got their guitars, like their bass and their electric guitar. They've got those refretted to be just intonation, which is like sort of a different scale. Just intonation is all about like having the frequencies of the intervals be like based on true whole number ratios. So like it's basically like just kind of using like a different scale that's more true to like nature, maybe you could argue. But anyway, the like sort of the proto minimal composer Lamont Young was a big advocate of it. But they if you like see them live, they literally have like some of the frets removed in their guitars, and it's been like refretted so that they can play in this like just intonation way.
Holy shit.
But anyway, really cool evolving jams they do. And I feel like there's a couple different like points of entry for this band. Like you could get into it if you're into like minimal composition, or if you're into like kind of more like angular instrumental, like rock, like from like a Battles type thing. They rule, and I'm stoked that they put out some live music.
This is the band Avi knows when you had the shirt.
Oh yeah, I was wearing that when we talked to him
during our interview with Avi.
Yeah, because you were wearing your Orioles hat, and I was like, oh well, I have a Baltimore shirt on, and it was a Horse Lord shirt. I forgot about that. Yeah, he was a fan, right? Didn't he say he was?
He said he knew him. Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Okay, is it my turn?
I think so.
Okay. My next pick is picking up the pace a little bit. It's actually a series of singles, which I feel like basically amount to an album by the duo known as Talabamin.
Fuck yeah.
And that's Axel Bowman and John Talbot. They dropped like, I think 3 singles, 2 songs each. Each track's like 10 minutes long, and they are fucking sick.
All this year?
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. The Madhouse dub / Melbourne Bolero one is really dope. Dance music, kind of organic and electronic sounding at the same time. Long dance tracks, a lot going on, very vibey,
yeah,
very good.
Great headphone music too, like dance, but dance for your mind as well.
Yeah.
Like,
what my friend described it as palm trees vibing, palm trees dancing.
Yeah, real cool sound design. Their 2017 collab album, The Nightland, is a fave of mine.
Word. What's your pick?
Those were my 3.
That was 3 each already?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I could keep going. I mean, I'll just shout some out real quick.
Yeah, dude, let's get some honorable mentions in.
Dave Harrington had an album. Dave Harrington of Dark Side fame. And of
Taper's Choice.
Yeah, had an album put out by Minaret Records, LA-based jazz label. That's really good, called The Pictures. This one is like a cool, like kind of like tiki slash psychedelic kind of cocktail album, I feel like, and it's an homage to film. It really shows off, like, I mean, Dave Harrington's an amazing guitarist, but he's also like a really good producer and like editor, sound editor.
Nice.
And you can hear that on this album.
Is this available streaming, or is it
Yeah, it's on streaming.
Okay.
And I guess while we're talking about Dave Harrington, you mentioned Taper's Choice. They released their first kind of studio record this year, but vinyl only.
Of course.
I bought that, and it's pretty sick. It's just like classic psychedelic rock.
Yeah, you got to bring it over. I want to hear that.
Yeah, it's cool. Jeff Weiss wrote the liner notes. Pretty awesome. And yeah, Taper's Choice is kind of like a super all-star jam band. But
right, it's like the Vampire Weekend drummer, a guy from Real Estate.
Yeah, the bassist.
Alex Bleeker.
Yeah, the bassist from Real Estate. And this
and
keyboardist
who's just somewhere.
He's from somewhere, man. He came from, I don't know where the fuck he came from, but he's amazing. He's amazing.
Yeah, they rip for sure. Those have been Bonefish's picks for 2023. And yeah, right around the corner, we've got a super fun convo with Sadie Sartini Garner on the new Andre 3000 album, New Blue Sun. We can just kind of hop into it. I was trying to remember the last time I saw you, and I think it was at the Sam Wilkes, one of his In Sheep's Clothing listening parties, which was awesome because you're friends with him, and so instead of waiting in line, we just got to like keep going into like the front best seats in the house for like all of his selections.
Was that at like a hotel where he like played like some of his favorite records or something in like a hi-fi room?
Yeah. Did you go to that, Justin?
Kristen and I went, before we knew each other, I think. So we probably all crossed vibes.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, it was at Neue House.
Yeah.
I remember
awesome.
it was a beautiful, beautiful night, and we sat on the kind of terrace out there that overlooks Hollywood Boulevard. You and me and Rochelle Christian, and yeah, that was like a really, really lovely night. And yeah, Sam was being very sweet and kept insisting that we cut the line, and like essentially forcing us into the front of the room.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was some funk record he like really, really wanted me to hear. And I feel bad that I don't remember what it was.
He played a Phil Upchurch album. Do you guys remember this?
I remember he played a lot of Cool in the Gang too.
It was amazing. Like he exposed me to a lot of music I hadn't checked out. So yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, that Phil that Cool in the Gang thing, like Cool in the Gang is such a it's such like a real heads know type of situation, because everybody on earth knows who Cool in the Gang is, but nobody knows that before they became world famous, they put out some incredibly good like hard funk records and were like crucial to the Hollywood funk scene in the 70s. So yeah, those early Cool in the Gang records are sick as hell.
Yeah, they're like instrumental too, right? Like
a
lot of them just Nice. Well, speaking of Sam Wilkes, who you name check in your great review for the new Andre 3000 record, I'm sort of curious. It was kind of a surprise for most of the world. When were you made privy of this? I know you mentioned, and we'll talk about more later, kind of the involvement of this album in like the LA kind of whatever you want to call it, ambient, new jazz free zone. But yeah, did you have like much of a heads up to this project's existence, or?
No, I personally did not. I found out about it when everybody else found out about it, which was, I think, the date was November 14th because it was the day before my birthday, which is the only reason that I remember that. But I woke up in the morning, I was brushing my teeth, I looked at my phone, and somebody texted me, one of my friends texted me and said, oh my God, Andre 3000 is making a flute album. And I could instantly see the kind of like cascading line of jokes that were going to come, like both on this group text that I'm on and then just in the world in general. And when I clicked the article she sent and saw that Carlos Nino was a part of it, I thought, oh fuck, like I'm gonna be, if I don't write something about this to make sure people know where this record comes from, I'm going to be so annoyed for the next like 6 months every time somebody talks about this album.
Because Sadie, so it's like kind of, you know, the jazz, spiritual jazz, ambient, whatever. Is that kind of your beat, like as a writer? At least I know for some of the Pitchfork stuff.
Kind of, yeah. It's one of the things that I've spent the last maybe 4 or 5 years. Yeah, 4 or 5 years, like really focusing on and trying to report on as much as I can. Report meaning review, like from a critical perspective, more so than like a journalistic perspective. But that has been one of my primary areas of focus. Although recently it's kind of shifted more to I tend to write more about death metal these days because tastes change. people shift, as we all know.
What a pivot. Okay, cool.
Yes, Sadie goes all over the place.
Yeah,
it's nothing off bounds.
Anyway, yeah. So to kind of go back to what Christian was saying, when you heard about this Andre flute record, what were your expectations and what was your reaction kind of, well, we know your reaction compared to the review, but what was going through your mind when you first heard about this? What did you picture?
Yeah, as I said, I read the article, the little kind of stub article on NPR that was saying, you know, this record exists and it's a flute record, and it was made by Carlos Nino with appearances from Nate Mercereau and all these other folks. And, you know, these are all names that I know and that I've written about plenty of times, and I understand where they're coming from. So I kind of instantly had a good sense of what this record was going to sound like based primarily on Carlos's involvement, because he does have such a distinctive production style and also a very distinctive creative method. And I could sense that was going to be the stronger creative personality in the room with this album, more so than maybe Andre, you know, turning on the stuff that made him famous, you know, the real star power, the high power charisma. It seemed clear from the fact that it is a flute record that he was going to be taking a step back from the kind of I'm the leader of this situation kind of spotlight and more into more of a collaborative mode. Plus, again, that's primarily how this scene tends to work. So I had a good feeling that it would sound a lot like a Carlos Nino and Friends record, and it does, but it is distinctly different. I think we can get into it in a bit, but I think there are a lot of ways that this album both is and isn't a Carlos Nino and Friends record that I think does mark it as distinctly Andre's rather than you know, the superstar being slotted into a scene that already works or whatever.
Yeah, and I guess real quick we should just say, I know your review mentioned, you know, if you're not into online ceramics and chakras and floating, this is going to be kind of maybe going to fly right over your head.
Tall order.
But so yeah, I mean, this is very much from the Leaving Records / floating scene. It's very LA. You got people playing with crystals in the park, stuff like that. Very deep listening, ambient sort of music. So I just wanted to kind of give a quick primer for people who aren't heads or into this kind of, I mean, it's kind of like a regional scene really. And you don't get much of that.
Yeah. I would love to know more about kind of how you came upon that scene yourself, Sadie. I mean, you start the review of the record talking about how it's, you know, it's not a quote unquote solo record, even though that's how it's billed. It's actually super collaborative and involves guys like Carlos Nino, who was the founding DJ of Dub Lab, and Matthew David, head of Leaving Records, both of whom you mentioned. Yeah, could you talk about kind of your involvement in that scene as a critic, as a fan?
I think I first became aware of Leaving as a scene and Matthew David's whole thing maybe around 2017, 2018-ish. And I should say that I think this is kind of this record is kind of a meeting place of considerably more than two kind of primary things that are happening in LA, which is like Carlos's whole vibe and Matthew's whole vibe with Leaving. And that they've certainly, there's been plenty of cross communication there, but this does feel like a bit more of a, like, you know, a kind of a product of both of those scenes. So I became aware of Matthew's whole thing and of this whole kind of universe of floaty new age music that was kind of just in the way that it was being presented. It seemed credible in a way that, if you found like an environments record at Goodwill in 2013, you would go ugh and roll your eyes and keep digging. I think kind of the way that Matthew, and this is maybe kind of gross to admit, but it's like a lot of it just comes down to packaging and design. And a lot of Leaving did some really beautiful reissues of some early Laraji records that they did in cassette in a really gorgeous orange slipcase with like a gold embossed title on it. And it was a striking object. Like I saw it at my friend Jason Woodbury's house, and I was like, that's like a gorgeous, like I want to have that. I want to own that thing you have. And then that made me go back and go like, well, what is it? What even is Laraji? Like what's on this cassette? And I think from there, that kind of opened me to this whole world of music that was being released on Leaving, and kind of the Sam Wilkes solo record from 2018. That's just called Wilkes.
Love that one.
It's just a phenomenal album, and it ended up being my favorite album of that year. This sense of making experimental music in the spirit of Pharoah Sanders without the noise of Pharoah Sanders really turned me on at that time as somebody who was already pretty deeply into Pharoah's world. And what I mean by like the spirit of Pharoah Sanders is there's a sense on Pharoah's records and on Sam's record, and then kind of implicit in the rest of the scene, that you don't have to be harsh or confrontational or otherwise like, for lack of a better word, rude, in order to push boundaries and in order to instigate great change. Like that these things can come, like that transgression can also be achieved through kindness, like radical kindness or sincerity, or like a search for peace or a search for a place to lay your head on the world. That notion that those things are equally valid as ways of approaching experimental music was, to me, really revolutionary at that time. And it made the world of experimental music feel much more accessible to me as somebody who, I mean, I mentioned that I write about death metal now, but at that time, noise music was anything noisy or extreme was just difficult for me to get a hold of, which is the effect of like working in an office job where you you can't really be blasting Merzbow when you're trying to like do filing or whatever. So I think like that's kind of the way that I came aware of all that stuff. And then with Carlos's whole scene and the kind of International Anthem Records, the jazz label that's I think they're based out of both Chicago and LA now. I think I became aware of all that when a guy named Dexter Story put out a record in 2018 also, I believe. Dexter is a local LA guy. He's a musicologist. I think he's done his PhD in musicology at UCLA. And he's traveled back and forth between here and Ethiopia quite a bit and has a very, very deep understanding of Ethiopian music. And he makes these incredible records, like really beautiful, like deep in conversation with like 70s Ethiopian funk and some Ethiopian classical music and other music from like around East Africa. And I saw him play at Zebulon, and Carlos was his auxiliary percussionist, and it was just like an amazing thing to physically witness this guy he's got like big long hair and like a big beard, and everybody else in the band is kind of like trim and, very, very hip and cool. And Carlos is very hip and cool as well, but in a hirsute kind of manner. And he's like, he's like shaking his shells and like throwing them down and then hitting a gong and then like running, like where everybody else is kind of this picture of poise and cool. Carlos is this picture of like heat and activity, but in a way that created music that was calming and beautiful. So it was a very strange thing to just like physically witness and go like, what the hell is going on?
That was my reaction when I first saw Carlos Nino play. I was like, is he even playing anything? But it was amazing. It was like it seemed like he had a lot of just sort of like indigenous instruments and percussion, and it was so cool.
And in the moment I thought like, there's no way that guy's doing this there's no, like if you went to see Dexter Story tomorrow night, there's no way he's playing the shells and hitting the gong at the same moment. Like he's making this shit up. And now it's like, well, of course he's making that shit up. That's the whole point. Like the rest of the band might be working with a set composition, but Carlos is responding to that composition. And that in and of itself is like, that's an interesting method. And that's part of what makes music like New Blue Sun so interesting and so special, is that it does come from a place of like spontaneous composition, where like if they sat down to make that record today, or even the day after they made it, it would sound totally different, and the music, the melodies would not be the same, and the way the songs develop would not be the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a snapshot in time. And so, yeah, I mean, we could just get into the record. You dug the record. I dig it, Christian.
Yeah, I do. I think, yeah, I mean, we can maybe, we might get into this, but I dig its existence maybe more than its actual sounds. I mean, I think it has high highs. Like Sadie,
Yeah.
I think Bipolar Disorder is the best track. I think there's also, as Sadie so articulately put in the review, that it's quite ponderous at times. But yeah, I there's parts I really, really enjoy about it. I was making omelets
Nice.
maybe a week ago in the morning with my 5-year-old. He is trying to get into like helping me cook. And we had on the Panther track, That Night in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And he was kind of just like struggling to like break open these eggs and getting his hands all sticky, and felt very kind of primal and like, but also like serene and kind of pleasant and nice. And so, yeah, I think it definitely, it sort of strikes me as kind of in like the Brian Eno spirit of like accompaniment music.
Totally.
But yeah.
I mean, I like this album. I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, do I like the idea more than the music? Like, I feel like Andre's album really intersected at a time in my life, and I think a lot of people's lives, of like, you know, like a newfound interest or appreciation for this sort of music, ambient music, spiritual jazz, or whatever you want to call it, ambient jazz, which Sadie mentioned in her review. And then when I listen to it, it's almost like I like it, but it's almost like I want to like it more, and I don't quite go over that hump, you know. Like,
Yeah.
There's moments when I want to put this number one on my list of the year, like that, but it doesn't quite get me over the finish line. And I think Sadie mentioned this in the review, where there is kind of moments of stasis, or kind of where things aren't kind of going anywhere. It's just kind of swimming around. But I guess that's okay, right? I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely moments that I probably, like, if I were in the control booth, I probably would have trimmed. There are moments where I think you can hear that the band is trying to figure out where to go next. If you're playing a more aggressive form of free jazz or something, you can push through those moments with volume and with a kind of stance of power. And one of the, I'm not going to say downfalls of this approach to music, because it's not a downfall, but one of the potential pitfalls is that when you're trying to figure out what to do next, which is a necessary part of the music, it can sound as though you're not doing anything at all. You know, it can sound like you're kind of treading water, or you know, kind of twirling your hair in your finger or something while you think of, okay, what makes sense. So it becomes a philosophical question of, should those moments be snipped out of a record for the sake of a listening experience, or do they prove to be interesting from a kind of documentarian perspective, to see that, like, to kind of show that this music was truly generated on the spot and was something that they were figuring out as they were doing it. Because I think the lack of final polish from a production perspective, from a structuring perspective, because the production is polished, the lack of final polish from a structuring perspective does make it feel more live. It feels more like you're in the room watching them look at each other, holding on a note, holding on a moment, while somebody tries to pick out a new route to follow for the whole band. And to me, that this is where I start to think that it's essentially worthless to talk about music in terms of value or in terms of is this good or bad, because it simply is a different approach, and it doesn't feel appropriate to apply the metric of good or bad to music that's not trying to adhere to the values of how we traditionally think of what makes music good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of like a big thing with improvised music in general, for me at least, is like it's helped me to get beyond that kind of binary of thinking of music in terms of, is this achieving something, or is this like blowing my mind in a certain way? And it's helped me to get more into a space of simply witnessing what's happening and taking part where I can, but also being honest with myself about where like I'm not as engaged with the process, which feels like a roundabout way of saying like, yeah, sometimes it's boring.
I think it's, and it is deeper than that. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't matter if it's good or bad. I mean, this is kind of like medicine, right? It's just like, or it's a way to be present or whatever use it has for you.
I feel like too, I get the sense that if it was this more structurally polished thing, it would feel kind of inauthentic to the community that birthed it. Like if he was like, because Andre 3000, as storied and as phenomenal of an artist and creator as he is, he's like, I mean, is it fair to say he's a relative newbie to this world, or a relative newcomer to this world? So it's like for him to do a lot of improv jams, but then, sort of mine them for like the pop moments that may have made for a more exciting record. It also, I feel like, would sort of betray, the spirit that it came from, and would maybe alienate kind of that community in a way.
Totally. At that point, you get at that point, Andre is using them, right? Like Andre is using them to make an Andre record at that point, and that's one of the things that I find really moving about this album, and I do mean the word moving. Like Andre is an absolute superstar. He sold 25 million records, but he is able to come into a scene and respect the boundaries of that scene and insert himself as I don't mean this as an insult, but as a naive participant within that scene, or you might say like having beginner's mind, like they say in Buddhism. He's introducing himself in that way, and he never asserts the largesse that his reputation and his history gives him the right to, and he never does kind of push the record into a place where it does feel like, oh my God, this megastar has come into this small scene and he thinks it's all about him and he's totally fucked it up. Like we've seen that happen so many times in music history, and it's very commendable to me that like it just sounds like it came from that world. If he didn't have his name on it, you would never know. And to me, some people have said that as an insult, like, oh, we wouldn't even be paying attention to this record if it didn't have his name on it. And it's like, yeah, that's what makes it so fucking cool. Like he made a record that fucking sits in that scene and works. That's so like nobody else could do that. You can't even picture Big Boy doing something like that.
Yeah, no, it is
as great as Big Boy is.
It's really cool that he kind of just was able to kind of disappear into this music, whereas a lot of other artists, it's happened. Big artists have kind of brazenly stolen or borrowed from smaller scenes or movements in music. But he's really just kind of seeing himself as a peer or somebody who's a student. And you hear it in real time, which is really cool.
Totally, yeah. I mean, even as you say in your review, his playing on the album is quite tentative and reluctant, and it's maybe some people would have preferred that, but for him to come in shredding, guns blazing would have
if you just like
different thing, much more bizarre thing.
Like imagine if he just came in and started doing like Anchorman style flute lines. That'd be pretty rough. I got a question. What kind of impact do you think this might have on the greater music scene, if any? And will this be, a gateway for people into ambient new age kind of spiritual jazz writ large?
I think it's like inevitable, but I think the percentage of people will, it might be very small compared to the size of the audience for this record. So where like an album like Nevermind introduced so many people to either indie rock or punk or grunge or whatever in the early 90s, I don't think that this album is going to have the kind of paradigm shifting effect that an album like that did. Like, I don't think we're going to see like the Drake ambient record. God, nobody would ever want to hear that anyway. Like, I don't know that it's going to have, I don't know what kind of effect it's going to have, obviously, but I would think that because this music is more inaccessible in its own way than, you know, something like, you know, if you heard Smells Like Teen Spirit and then you bought Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden, I don't know that there's that similar sense of the things that kind of hook a broader audience into a more challenging kind of music, which is to say like hooks, and, you know, traditionally structured songs and all that. But all that is a long way around of saying, you know, if I think 5 million people have streamed the first track on this record, or it has 5 million streams, if 5,000 people, which is a small percentage of that number, then go and look at the list of influences that Andre has shared, and start getting into that whole world and all this stuff and start buying like John Hassell records, like, you know, I think that kind of thing is possible. I think it's just that the percentage is going to be, the question then is like, will that number be big enough to like ripple back out and affect culture at large? I honestly have no idea.
I was going to say, speaking of just like effects that this album will have, I think of it as like a, you know, kind of a watershed moment for that community and for this kind of LA scene.
Yeah, we can just talk about like other good Leaving Records albums, or
I mean, I really love the Fote album he did with Carlos Nino. It's called An Offering, I think. There are a handful of other musicians on it, but they performed it in Topanga like maybe last year, and I tried and failed to see them. I made it in time for Laraji, which was great, but I missed the Fote and Carlos Nino set, which is a bummer. But Carlos still played with Laraji, and it was, I think, maybe the first moment I was like, okay, I've seen this guy kind of everywhere here, and like, okay, this is that dude. But I remember in between like songs, he would like, you know, this place in Topanga is really cool. It's like the Will Greer Theatricum Botanicum. It's like this little outdoor amphitheater that this like producer or actor who was like blacklisted back in those days made this Shakespearean theater. But yeah, I just have these memories of Carlos Nino like whispering out to the auditorium like Topanga, like just kind of like sending it everyone.
So sick.
But yeah, really, really cool that this album kind of shines a spotlight on that, and I hope it leads to, if nothing else, like just more kind of cool music collaborations where Carlos Nino can get in some other, you know, cool rooms with cool people and see what happens. But yeah, you've reviewed a number of the Carlos Ninos and Friends records. Do you have any sort of maybe from the year or just overall some of your faves from kind of this scene that we've been talking about?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like Carlos Nino and Friends as a concept is like constantly putting out records, which is just, it's like funny to me. Like like he literally put another record out the same day that New Blues came out. It's just like,
it's amazing.
Like most artists would like, oh my God, I have a collaboration with one of the biggest musicians in the history of music. I'm going to like space this other stuff out so that it gets caught up in the long tail. And it's like, no, dude, you put it out on the same day, it's going to get lost in the shadow.
I couldn't even find it. I tried to look for it. I couldn't even find it anywhere.
So I felt bad. I forget who the person is that he made the record with, because it was a dual named release. And I was like, wow, I mean, you may have gotten a little bit of a lift, but if that record came out like today instead of 2 weeks ago, it may have been a different situation.
Right. That's hilarious.
But there's a record he made. So the Carlos Nino and Friends records generally are like across the board, like very good to great. I am especially partial to one that he recorded in New York at Commend, it's now closed, but it was the store associated with Revenge International, the record label. And I think the album in itself may have been called Live at Commend. And I think he's playing, it's been a minute since I've listened to it or thought about it, but I think his ensemble included like Miguel Atwood Ferguson and maybe some other like local New York guys. But it sounds, as you can imagine, because it's being made so far from here, it sounds very different from a lot of the other Carlos Nino and Friends records. And it was recorded live in front of people rather than live in the studio. So it has a very different and kind of more active energy to it. It feels more like it's trying to stand up, which is not necessarily better. It's just very different. And so I enjoy that one a bunch. And he did one with Miguel Atwood Ferguson that was billed as Carlos Nino and Miguel Atwood Ferguson. The name of the album was Chicago Waves. There's a particular experimental space in Chicago that I believe they recorded it out that like Mackay McRaven and a lot of those Chicago International Anthem guys play at. So Chicago Waves is also really great. But as you mentioned, like I'm buds with Sam Wilkes, and so this is a good, like definitely take it with a grain of salt. But I just think Sam's stuff is so great. Like I think his first solo record is just so lush and so beautiful. And I think it was right after we had moved to LA, and I was like, like this is the kind of like underground I wanted to find here of like people making music that's very beautiful and that feels very, very loving and homey, the way that like a Midwestern DIY record might feel, but it's being done like with horns and like from a jazz perspective rather than, like from an indie rock perspective or whatever. And I don't know. I really, really love that record.
Yeah, I think
it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that one and the one he did with Sam Goodell from that year. When I first heard the music for saxophone and bass guitar, that really shifted my listening habits for sure. And really great music. It's like they took kind of like the PBS smooth jazz brunch and made it like good and cool, like, and interesting. And, and that's hard to do.
All about that packaging, like you said.
Yeah.
I wrote about it for the AV Club. I was started for the AV Club at the time, RIP to the real AV Club. And I made it my album of the year. And what I said was that it felt like Broken Social Scene making a Pharoah Sanders record. And when I later met Sam and became friends with him, he was like, that is exactly what I was hoping for. It was like that sense of like, I've got all my friends around me and I want to express this feeling of like love and togetherness that we have through the lens of a kind of floating Pharoah Sanders-y type jazz thing. Yeah. Which is just like, that's just like such a good idea. Like, such a good idea.
He nailed it. And a lot of joy, he's really good at conveying kind of like collective joy in his music.
Got to get him on the pod.
We love Sam.
He's reachable. He's like that, and his personality is like that too. Is what I'll say. Like he's a very bubbly, extraordinarily kind human being.
Nice.
It'll be interesting to see kind of how it lives, I guess, what its lifetime is like. I mean, I think the number of streams already is like maybe more than I maybe would have expected. Like the first week, did one of the songs chart?
If you look though, as the album goes by, the streams go down and down and down. It's so I'm wondering like,
which also doesn't really reflect their quality as songs too. Like it's not like the heaters are up front. It's.
But it's also like, I mean, it's a niche product. Like it's by the virtue of what it is, it's going to be a curiosity to millions of people and something worth revisiting to a vanishingly small number of people. Which is, again, not a reflection on its quality, just on how wide of an appeal this kind of music has in the world. So I think probably every album ever on Spotify probably does, the lead track probably has, generally speaking, probably has the most views, and it probably does go down like that. But I suspect the gradient of that curve is remarkably steep on this album.
Yeah.
Just because it's, if you've made it to the end of the Panther song, you've been listening for like 45 minutes already, and you're only on track 3. And I think for a lot of people, you go, well, fuck, I got other things to do today. Like I can't be sitting around listening to this album like for all of my day.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for talking to us. Check out Sadie's work. Yeah. You wrote a thing about the Dead recently, right? For The Ringer?
I
This
did.
year? Yeah, I read that.
I
It's
did.
cool.
Great piece, yeah.
I read that before I knew you.
My wife and I are both really big Deadheads, which also I came to through experimental music, which I write about in that piece because I was getting really into like the mid 70s Herbie Hancock, which is really wild, spacey stuff and like a lot of Can stuff. And then my pal Jonathan Williger was like, he was super into the Dead. And I think through talking to him and learning what was so appealing about that music to him, I realized like there's this kind of point of conversation between these three artists who were almost certainly not listening to each other's records. So yeah, that mid to late 70s Dead stuff, when they like really get far out, it gets really far out. And that I've entered the universe from its farthest most reaches. And then
That's
now,
right.
as I wrote in the piece, like now I'm the kind of person who's like, when they play US blues, like when Dead and Company plays US blues, I'm like so ready to sing "Wave That Flag."
Oh,
and
yeah.
just, have a lot of beers and just sing sing along to Uncle John's band or whatever. So yeah.
What's your favorite Dead year? Do you have one?
I tend to, I mean, this is like as basic as it gets, but I tend to just stay in like the late 70s.
Ooh, like the disco funk Dead.
I do like the disco funk Dead. I think, I mean, Shakedown Street's an amazing song, and I like the way that they do. I used to hate it, but I like the way that they do Dancing in the Street in that era with the little like weird disco pop that they put in it, and then they use that to just go into the middle of nowhere and just do their own thing. So that's where I tend to. I also really love Donna. I'm like super devoted to her, and anytime that I can hear her let out like her big yelp, I'm like pretty happy with that. And she tended to be at her peak at that era too. So yeah.
Nice. Christian, I sent you a Dark Star from 1974. I'm waiting for.
I know.
I'm waiting for you to report back.
I still need to dive in. Yeah, I need to clear some time in my schedule. But yeah,
you need to clear 3 hours for one song.
Right on. Well, I got a weekend coming up. Well, maybe I can
get it in a bike ride or something.
Once the light turns on for you with the Dead, it turns on very, very bright, and it is very hard to turn it off. So you do need to approach with caution.
Yeah. No, but that piece was awesome, even as not a Deadhead at all. That was a really enjoyable read.
Oh, thanks.
It's awesome hearing you talk about music and reading your writing. So super appreciate it.
All right, y'all.
Alrighty.
Good to meet you, Sadie.
Thanks a ton. I appreciate it. This was really fun.
Thanks for talking to us. Yeah.
Yeah,
for
thank
sure.
you.
See ya.
Nice to meet you, Justin.
Nice to meet you. Okay, bye-bye.
See ya.
Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Bonefish. If you enjoyed that, we've got other episodes, including interviews with A.V. Tare and Deacon of Animal Collective, as well as a bunch of other AC content. We've also interviewed some other musicians and writers in this sort of psychedelic experimental sphere. You can find us on Instagram at BonefishPod. I'm Christian. Justin is my co-host. Please leave a rating and review if you dug it. And until next time, keep it real.
Bonefish.